So a little bit about Power. We are a faith-filled organization, multiracial organizing force in the city, working for racial and economic justice on a livable planet. We all have to live here. We want to do it in a just way. We organize across southeastern and central Pennsylvania and have deep roots in Philadelphia. And so we're organizing throughout neighborhoods throughout Philadelphia and greater Philadelphia and throughout Pennsylvania. In Philadelphia, we are transforming, or our conversation is about transforming Philadelphia's publicly owned gas utility, which is critical for our goals. And we're created a PGW Just Transition group within our climate justice and jobs team to explore these possibilities and what a green just transition could look like. Along with a number of other organizations, Power has several principles we want to put forward this evening that we want to focus on. Actually, we want to bring attention to 4 guiding core values or principles. We can share these in the chat and share the document as well, but they are affordability. So affordability means ensuring that all Philadelphians have the energy they need at the rate that they can afford, that burdens that the burden of transition does not fall on those that are most burdened. So that's one of our principles, affordability. Our second is safety. Um, in regards to a safe, clean energy system with rapid decarbonization, the implementation of energy sources that don't involve greenhouse gas emissions in order to protect our livable climate. And our third one is protecting good living wage jobs. So protecting good union jobs while creating new green jobs, ensuring that people who have been excluded from living wage employment gain access to them. So that's actually an increase. We're looking for that to be after this just transition, unions making even more to feed their families through renewable energy. And the fourth one is health. We want to make sure that all, that that the system is maintains the health of residents in our city, state, country, and planet. We also, so those are 4 core values there: affordability, safety, living wage jobs, and health as factors and values we want to kind of center in our conversation. We see maintaining democratic control of PGW is essential to sustaining these values through a just transition. And we're committed to working for solutions that integrate and further each of these values. So we can talk more about those 4 core values this evening in our discussion. We also are involved in the housing justice work. And with our allies, we are exploring the possibility of large-scale programs to repair and retrofit homes across Philadelphia in order to improve health and safety, reduce utility bills, and to help people stay in their homes. This focus reduces pressures towards gentrification. These programs could go hand in hand with transforming PGW in regards to weatherization, all types of ways that PGW can be a part of what the new just transition looks like. And so we are happy as a coalition, as a group. We're happy there is a citywide conversation underway with new directions for PGW. really honored and are thankful to work with the City of Philadelphia Office of Sustainability, who has commissioned a business diversification study to explore various ways PGW could reduce emissions while promoting equality. This study will be released early summer, and PGW will choose and implement a pilot project that tests out the particular options for the future of PGW. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Mitch.
Great, thanks so much, Russell, for getting us started. I'm just going to share a bit more about why we're convening and then introduce the speakers real quick. Yeah, along the lines of what Russell was saying, there's a lot of big questions to ask, and we know that we need a lot of conversation within and across different groups about possibilities for the future. And to help advance that conversation, we wanted to bring folks together to learn about some really exciting work that's happening in Massachusetts as organization HEET, whose co-directors are here tonight, and allies have moved gas utilities to begin piloting something called network geothermal heating and cooling systems. And at the same time as gas worker unions are planning for their members to participate in building those systems. We believe that the approach that's being tested out in Massachusetts could play a really significant, important role in transforming PGW and our city in ways that uphold all the values that Russell mentioned. So we're really thrilled to be hosting Audrey Schulman and Zaina Magavi, who are the co-directors of HEET, along with John Bonapane. I am really sorry if I mispronounced your name. I think I got it right. Who's a staff representative for the United Steelworkers Union in Massachusetts. We're going to hear from Audrey and Zainab about this technology and business model for gas utilities that HEET has been developing and promoting, and about the network geothermal pilot projects that are about to get started. And we'll hear from John about gas workers and gas worker unions' perspectives on the situation and the role of gas workers in these network geothermal pilot projects. The speakers are going to present for about 30-ish minutes, 35 minutes, and then we'll have lots of time for questions. We really hope this webinar will bring forward ideas and information that can help us all to plan for PGW's future. We encourage you, if you want to post questions during the presentations, you can post questions in the chat. The moderators will be monitoring the chat and will collate those questions to pose during the Q&A. You can also pose additional questions then after the presentations end. Yeah, I hope that all makes sense and that I didn't leave anything out. Julie or Russell, good, okay. So I'm not gonna give long introductions. Actually, Audrey and Zainab, who's gonna go first?
I'll go first. Okay. I can't share screen yet.
Great. Yeah, let me let me get that set up. I thought I had done that. I apologize.
Oh yeah, no worries.
Well, to do that, I will just give a little Zoom tip that if for people who would like to feature the speaker on many of your devices, you can go to the top right-hand corner where it says view, and there's a grid, and you can choose speaker view instead of gallery view. And if you want to switch back to see everybody in the Zoom room, you can switch it back to gallery view. Many people like to feature the speaker so you can see who's speaking.
Yeah, or you don't have to with me.
Okay, Audrey, I think you should have sharing. You should be able to share now.
I am now going to try. Hopefully you are seeing a presentation and not something from Amazon or eBay or, okay, good. Good. I'm Audrey Schulman. I'm with HEET. It's a nonprofit with a mission to cut carbon now through systems change. We do not take funding from industry, whether gas utilities or geothermal. HEET began as a group of neighbors organizing energy upgrade work parties to teach efficiency skills to volunteers so they'd know how to cut emissions in their own homes. We've always been really data-based. and innovative and hungry for emissions. So 13 years later, here we are today talking about how gas companies can innovate to move towards renewable thermal while lowering energy bills. And it seems like Philadelphia actually has been at innovation for a long time too. Since last night I was reading a book that says that in 1814, gas was used for one of the first times in the entire country in Independence Hall, where the Peel family used pine tar to make gas lighting. Just fun fact. So it's time to innovate again, given that in the last few months, a variety of states, including Massachusetts, California, New York, and I guess, Philadelphia, have sort of asked their gas companies to create a plan to decarbonize in the case of the states, to meet their state's emissions requirements. And gas being overwhelmingly methane, which is a greenhouse gas 84 times more potent than CO2 for the first 20 years it's in the atmosphere, it cannot ever be considered non-emitting. So there has to be some strong innovation here. And meanwhile, the gas utilities are in a pretty difficult bind, because at the same time that they're getting these decarbonization plans, a lot of them have to replace leak-prone gas pipes, partly, if not a lot, for safety. Here are the gas pipe replacement plans in Massachusetts just for the next 5 years. I know Philadelphia has a lot of aging gas pipes also. These pipes that are being installed now will be amortized over 30 to 65 years into the future. That means us customers are going to be paying for these gas pipes long past the point when potentially state mandates are stopping us from using gas widespread. It doesn't make sense to throw a lot of money into what might turn out to be stranded assets. So let's be wise. What alternatives are there for us gas customers to transition that will result in the world that we want in the future, that will be fair to all? So for us gas customers, we can move to air source heat pumps. A heat pump is like a really efficient air conditioner that can work forward or backwards. So it can provide both heating and cooling. And they are fabulous under many circumstances, but they do have some challenges. They work most inefficiently when the air temperature outside is the worst. So then they'll strain the electric grid right when you need it the most. Secondly, you need a fair amount of discretionary income or good credit to get these. So not everybody can afford them. And three, at some point, all of us moving to air source heat pumps would result in the collapse of the gas utility under the burden of its own fixed costs. When that happens, there are going to be some gas workers still depending on it, and there's going to be some gas customers that are going to be depending on it. Likely, those gas customers are going to be the ones who cannot afford to get a new heating system, right? This is not a result that anybody wants. So another option instead of air source heat pumps are ground source heat pumps. This is less of a burden to the electric grid because they continue to work efficiently no matter what the temperature is outside, because they're pulling temperature from the ground, which is always somewhere in the 50s. It's close to the temperature we want in the house, so it's much more efficient to pull the heating or cooling we want out of that ground. However, there still are other problems. You need even more money or good credit to install these. And if we all moved to these single building installations of ground source heat pumps or geothermal, the gas system again would collapse. So the answer we want to suggest tonight is HEET's GeoMicro District. It's a networked system of ground source heat pumps. So so it's very similar to the gas system where the infrastructure is in the street, in the gas company's right of way, with service lines going to each building. There are boreholes attached going down just a few hundred feet. We're not going down into lava. And the pipes are filled with plain water. that's at the temperature of the ground. That way, heat pumps in each building can pull off the heating or cooling that building needs. And these geomicro districts are built to interconnect like Lego blocks. So the system can gradually replace the gas system over time, transforming it into a non-emitting, renewable thermal system. If the gas utilities install this, they can spread the cost of the system, of this infrastructure, across all of us and over decades, as they do with the gas infrastructure now. The gas companies already have the rights of way in the street. They have all of us gas customers, and they have the financing mechanism to share that infrastructure across all of us.
Audrey, I'm sorry. Someone noted in the chat that the images are cut off at the bottom. Are you able to adjust the window up a little bit?
Yes, it's yeah. Sorry.
No problem. Thank you.
The bottom's very boring. Just kidding. So networked geothermal has advantages. You can imagine a supermarket with its fridges humming all the way through the winter. It's going to be rejecting heat back into that shared loop of water, making the water hotter. And that heat can then be used by homes down the street. So secondly, the excess energy, for instance, heat in the middle of the summer, can be stored in the ground until it's needed. So you can pull it out during the winter when you really need that heat. To find out if this system might work in Massachusetts, HEET hired Buro Happold Engineering, which is the international engineering company who created New York City's 80 by 50 plan, to perform a statewide feasibility study to see how the system might work on different sort of prototypical street segments in Massachusetts, ranging from the fairly, the slightly more rural to the very urban. And Buro Happold calculated hourly energy loads for different types of streets and checked the results against real customer data provided by Eversource Gas. They found this system with boreholes 500 feet deep, every 20 feet down the street, could meet nearly 100% of the energy demand for almost our entire, all of our state that's on gas now. The only place it couldn't would be in the dense parts of the city. There, we'd have to make the boreholes deeper or put them in parking lots, or as we interconnect, we'd move the excess energy from other street segments into the cities. So for instance, that top line with the more rural area, it's overproducing cold. We could move that cold into the cities where it could be used. Or the third line down, that one has excess heat. Let's move that into the cities also. We found a variety of case studies that exist around the country. In Colorado Mesa University, there's 4 different systems that were interconnected over time that serve over 1 million square feet of buildings. They're gas backup boilers that are intended to restore the temperature of the water in the loop if it gets too cold. Haven't had to be used for that in over 13 years. So the system has many benefits. Unlike gas, water in a pipe does not explode. If it leaks, it'll just water the nearby trees. Without combustion, the indoor air will be cleaner. The system can provide cooling. With climate change, having access to air conditioning, that's going to be extremely attractive, if not critical for all of us. In Massachusetts, our climate's going to switch from a predominantly heating climate to a predominantly cooling one by 2070. And I assume the same is true for Philadelphia. The energy bills will go down below that of gas. And this makes sense, since once you install the infrastructure, you only have to pay for the operations, the maintenance, and the electricity used in the water and the heat pumps. And that electricity use is minimized because of the extraordinary efficiency of these networked geothermal systems. The emissions will also go down, since the only emissions will come from the power plants that are producing the electricity needed in the system. Here in Massachusetts, we've calculated the emissions will reduce by 60% immediately, given our local electric grid fuel mix. As our electric grid moves to more renewables, those emissions are going to decline further. Unlike air source heat pumps, as I said before, the system works just as efficiently no matter what the weather. So that flattens the electric peak load. This is a graph that XL Energy sent to Colorado Mesa University saying, like, what's going on? We know your campus is growing, but your electricity use, your peak demand each month is not. And with flatter electric peaks, all of us moving to electricity for our buildings, for our transportation can happen faster, and that electricity can then be sourced faster from renewables. So this is critical. Finally, the pipes in the street are the same type as are installed now for gas. This means retraining for installations and operations and maintenance is really easy. The boreholes, of course, are different and will require different expertise. And I assume John will talk about this more later. And now I think Zainab will talk.
Absolutely, I'll try. That was a lot of benefits that you just heard about. And I just want to be clear that most of them you can get just from this technology, regardless of who owns it. So I want to pause for a moment and call attention to those benefits that you get specifically by having a gas utility build this GeoGrid. And Audrey's already spoken about keeping gas workers in comparable jobs with good wages, et cetera. Also, the equity part, that by using a utility scale transformation for this, we can give access to everyone while keeping energy bills low. But my favorite, and those are really big ones. That's a just transition right there. However, also, doing this at utility scale gives us the speed and the scale of the transition that we need. And this one, if we just face what our goals are for 2050 and look at reality, the actual physical act of changing our energy system, this is a big one. So I should have added municipal in front of gas utility for Philadelphia, and then double bolded that low cost part, because of course, as a municipal utility, you have slightly less money going to shareholders, I assume. So anyway, this is a mind-boggling list. And next slide. And you in Pennsylvania know better than us the magnitude of our country's natural gas system. HEET and our allies don't have the power to transform a system of this scale. Next. And to be clear, HEET does not have direct power and never has. On top of that, we're very short. Instead, we drive change from our position as a network node in our ever-growing collection of stakeholders, coalition. And this slide is really messy and full of interconnections, just like the previous slide. And that's the reality of a change ecosystem. I don't know what yours will look like in Pennsylvania, but there's a lot of you on this call, and I know you have all the people you need to make this happen in your city. If you can accept the messiness, the uncertainty, the winding path forward, and the different personalities and perspectives, then you will have the people power to move forward together. And I don't want to leave that part out, because it's all great to have technology, but there's a lot of technology that is a great solution that never happens. Next slide. So coming back to the technology, we see this as a three-phase evolution. And the first phase is the initial demonstration. It's the demonstration project in the ground in your territory for everyone involved. To see is to believe. And I want to point out that you can call it a pilot, as we have probably done in this presentation, but it isn't new technology. It's a new way of using trusted technology. So I'm going to try to call it an initial installation or demonstration. And that first installation, it could be at some distal end of your infrastructure, non-critical, leak-prone cul-de-sac, or where there are gas constraints. And as Audrey explained, you can back your gas supply up to the end of the street and connect it to a single supplemental gas boiler for management of your new thermal loop should it be needed. As you can see here, this looks a bit like grafting a new green twig onto your gas tree. Next slide. And that's the stage that we are at in Massachusetts. And that impressive list of benefits earlier, together with our change ecosystem and feasibility study, has allowed this to happen really rapidly. It's an amazing process. And very briefly, Eversource Gas applied to our public utility for approval. It is the first gas utility approved on the gas rate base pilot of this kind of technology that I know of. And it's in an urban environment, about 100 homes and businesses, and it's going in the ground this summer with the system operational and collecting data by this fall. The second one is in Merrimack Valley, the location of a really tragic gas accident. And in the settlement for the sale of the utility that was responsible, there is funds for a geomicrodistrict for this community. It is a competitive grant run by our state agencies, and it does not specify that it will be run by a utility. It could be a municipality or other entity. There are a lot of wonderful options. And then finally, there is the other big gas utility in our state is National Grid. They're also in a couple other states, and they just filed an even larger proposal. They're specifically replacing their leak-prone gas infrastructure and working with low-income and EJ communities. And that is pending at our public utility department. We hope to know within a year. New York has several more pilots. There's a really fascinating one going forward in Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Michigan, and others are interested. And a lot is happening all at once. HEET, we are doing our best, next slide, to share as much as we can and help support the process as much as we can, with the overarching goal of ensuring that this technological solution and business model evolution is used for the public good and is done as successfully as possible. To that end, we are running monthly charrettes with the goal of open conversation and information sharing among all stakeholders. And we hope this will allow us to identify and resolve challenges before they grow and help to ensure that the first installs go well. And us, in this case, includes the gas utilities, participating customers, municipalities, gas workers, geo-contractors, developers, advocates, regulators, scientists, and your neighbor. Through this process, we're also building a library of tools. Most recently, we created a site selection criteria checklist, and there's a basic data set coming soon, initial standard data set. And these materials will be publicly available in our online library, and the charrettes are open to all if you want to join us. All of our materials, I should mention, are Creative Commons, which is open source, and we ask only for acknowledgement and sharing back good ideas. Next slide. We also want to make sure that there is sufficient data out of the first installs to inform the next ones so that we are learning. We want to ensure that there is deep understanding and good data from widely respected sources. So we've built a kind of all-star research team to deliver that in the first install in mass. And we're going to collect this to build a optimization, to build a standard evaluation protocol. And again, each of these tools we will make available to all interested. All right, next slide. So that gets us to the iterate and scale phase, which we're not at yet. We see it as a continuation of the learning and engagement process, continuing to learn and refine and optimize. And again, these geomicrodistricts we're proposing, they're a type of networked ground source heat pump, and they interconnect like Lego blocks. With a first pilot in the ground, additional street segments can be added and then interconnected, backing the gas system up each time. while continuing to provide a single supplemental gas boiler as a thermal management tool. So you've grafted a renewable thermal delivery network onto the gas system, and now it is growing, kind of a new kind of hybrid. Next slide. And I just want to mention briefly that this kind of interconnection has been done in that case study in Colorado. And this screenshot is for any engineers in the crowd. It shows the systems controls for that system. And next slide. I want to mention very briefly that ongoing thermal balancing is really what the role becomes for this thermal utility that is managing a geomicrodistrict or a growing GeoGrid. And that ongoing thermal balancing, at various stages of growth, you will have excess annual cooling or heating you will need to shed at some point during the year. So to keep your system balanced in the long term, and this can be seen as a possible co-benefit you can provide, and there's so many options, and actually some really fun ones, which I put on the right, like cooling irrigation water or melting snow on sidewalks. What could you do with extra heating or cooling on an annual basis? In this phase, you will also be able to start to measure some of the benefits to the power grid that Audrey mentioned earlier. And taking that whole energy system approach and seeing both thermal and electric power grids as one internet of energy opens up a lot of possibilities for even more optimization and cost lowering and efficiency. And I want to mention last one more utility, the water utilities. So that iterative advancing process that we imagine happens next as we begin to install these across the country, I would hope that we each have opportunities to try different things. And I'm really excited by the possibilities you have in Philadelphia. My understanding is you have a municipal gas and water utility, and that opens up some interesting opportunities for using your municipal water system as a thermal resource to decrease costs and increase speed in building a GeoGrid. And I have plenty of materials on that I'm happy to share. And I just want to mention, I'm not suggesting that we change the temperature of the water system in any significant way, nor am I suggesting that we interact with the actual drinking water in any way. But there are some other great opportunities. And next slide. And so then you get to this. Oh, sorry, one more slide. That was, you get to this, and this is our vision for 2050. Minus having an actual graphics artist on staff. So we call this larger scale interconnected network or networked ground source heat pumps, a GeoGrid, a grounded energy system for a safe future. Next slide. And I just want to acknowledge that there are legislative and regulatory changes in each state that are necessary to get all the way to a GeoGrid. And we're working on that in Massachusetts. And we're not going to go into it here, but if you're interested, you should check out our Future of Heat legislation. And we are looking at securitization as a tool to lower the cost of long-term debt for the new infrastructure going in and redirect the savings to worker retraining and low-income access. Next slide. So here is a really cool image of our gas system in Massachusetts. And I always mention, I think this is really beautiful. And in the 1800s, it was pretty visionary. So it's time now to envision something better. And we are in a year into this pandemic somehow. And we certainly know that ignoring a problem doesn't make it go away, unfortunately. And we have also witnessed our potential as a society for transformative change, and how disruptive it can be when it's not planned. So here is a plan. Next. Some of your current gas system, maybe it has too few customers for the length of pipe. Well, strategic abandonment may be the best choice in such cases. I want to mention that. In a dense area like Philadelphia, this is very unlikely, but that's one option, is that in some places it may make more sense to do individual air source heat pumps or other strategies. Next. I also want to mention that strategic maintenance of some of your system, particularly industrial uses. If you have a glass smelter, we don't have an electrification option. There are uses of combustion we have not electrified. And so let's set aside that portion that needs to be maintained, perhaps with biogas or hydrogen, and next, which then leaves the majority of the system to evolve into a state-of-the-art thermal grid, a green grid, where everyone can have access to heating and cooling with a price lower than heating with gas, and we all get to a safe, clean, carbon-free future. In short, we can face the challenge of decarbonization and transform our energy system into what we need at the speed and scale we need. So I am persistently in total awe of this opportunity in front of us. Next. And this is a picture of my 3 daughters. It's an old picture because they were really cute back then. My oldest is waiting for college acceptances now. But in case you're wondering, this is why I am here. It's also why Audrey's here. This is why the Creative Commons, why an NGO has built gas utilities a viable new business model. Because we want to build them a better world. And I really believe we can. So thank you. And next. We always provide any resources you want.
Thank you, Zainab. Thank you, Audrey. Okay, all right, some people are doing the clap emoji. Thank you very much. I'm gonna do that too. That was a great presentation. We're really grateful, and I'm sure people will have many. I already see some questions are coming in, but let's bring John on now to share his perspective and the perspective of gas workers and gas worker unions. John, are you able to unmute yourself?
Do you hear me?
Yep, yeah, great.
Thank you. Thank you, Mitch. Thank you, Russell. I hope you get a unique perspective from what I talk about tonight. I'm going to tell you about who we are, what we do, why we're here tonight, and also probably why we're not here. I don't have any slides. I tried to send you a picture of me standing in front of Rocky's house last year, just before they locked everything down in Philly. I love Philly. But I didn't have time to do it. But anyways, if there's any union people on the Zoom tonight, I did find out that PGW is one of the bigger local unions at PGW, a utility worker union of America, gas workers, and I plan on catching up with them at some time after this to kind of educate them about what's going on in Massachusetts and how we're trying to get involved in the different technologies. But my name is John Bonaparte. I'm a United Steelworkers staff rep. The United Steelworkers represent the whole gamut of any type of industry you could probably think of. But for the last 2 years, I've been doing that. For my first 32 years, I was a gas worker out in the field. So I started when I was 19. I spent most of that time in what we call the service department. A lot of interaction with consumers at their homes, responding to emergencies, installing gas pipes, all types of different things involved with maintaining the gas pipeline system in the Boston area, the National Grid. Well, now it's National Grid. When I started, it was Boston Gas. We've had several different owners in the last 20 or 30 years. For the last 24 years, I've been involved with the local union that represents the people who work for National Grid. And I'm going to talk about really about them and what they do. And how we have to get them involved in this new technology. So in Massachusetts, the steelworkers have probably a little over 2,000 people that we represent for several different gas utility companies now. Along with the steelworkers represent thousands of other gas workers throughout the country for different companies in different states. Our people, the people that we represent, for the most part, people with high school education. We do have people coming in with college degrees, but probably a little more now than used to be. but for the most part, like me, they went almost right from high school, started the job, spend their entire lives with the gas utility. That's probably the majority of the people that I represent. So tonight, I got to get it up out front. I'm not here to talk about any climate change legislation. We often say that, we'll agree to disagree with the people we're working with. Massachusetts has some very aggressive climate legislation right now. It's almost ready to pass, despite, in all honesty, our opposition. But I'm not here to talk about that. I'm not here to talk about gas safety, although I've spent personally years as a proponent of gas safety at the regulatory agency in Massachusetts and at the State House. It's something that we spend a lot of time trying to make sure that these utility companies are operating safely and making sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. We think gas should be part of our future energy needs. It's affordable with the proper technology like new gas pipes and cleaner equipment. It can be more efficient, and it should really be part of a balanced energy approach. With that, we think that geothermal energy loop systems, micro districts, is also a viable type of option for a gas utility company to operate. Gas companies are in the business of supplying very similar type energy. The gas that the companies supply now travel through pipes through a distribution system into people's homes where it's consumed. As you heard, I'm not going to get into how geo works. I'm no expert on geothermal by any means, but it's a similar type operation. And we think that the gas utility companies can turn it into a business model that works for them, that works for everybody as an option. As you heard Audrey and Zainab talk about, that's what's happened in Massachusetts. There's 3 different proposed pilot programs right now, 3 different investor-owned, well, 2 different owned investor utilities. It used to be 3. And I'll get into that a little more later. We've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years educating ourselves, educating our members, educating the gas workers on how geothermal works, the different types of job tasks that would be involved with operating, installing, maintaining a geothermal microdistrict system. And we've come to the conclusion, as I said, that this can work for a utility. This is technology that gas workers can be part of today. A lot of the skills that gas workers have now today can be transitioned, operating, maintaining, and installing a geothermal network. Things like excavating. We use a lot of excavation equipment to maintain and install gas lines. We install polyethylene pipe. As Audrey said, it's the same pipe that's used with geothermal systems. We can do directional drilling. That's where you don't have a long trench to install a pipe. You can start at one end and send it underground so you don't disturb everything in between to where it has to go. We pipe buildings, homes. We install and repair meters, meter equipment, regulating equipment, pumps. That's stuff we're all very good at. And that's stuff that we think we can do in a geomicro district. As I said, all skills that are very easy transitionable to servicing and installing the district. We've been working very hard over the last couple of years, along with the good people at the Gas Leaks Alliance and HEET, to try and get the gas workers involved in these pilots. It hasn't been easy. As you can imagine, it's been a challenge. Trying to get the utilities to commit to utilizing the current gas workers as part of a pilot, to be part of a potential beginning for something new and different that could benefit everybody in the long term. It hasn't been easy. We're talking about Eversource and National Grid. Audrey said Zainab actually explained the status of the different pilots, but the pilot that resulted from the Merrimack Valley settlement agreement after the incident, I'll call it a disaster, it was a gas disaster. That's probably the closest to fruition. We're working with all different types of groups and people to try and make that happen. Unions, people who work for the state, the Attorney General's office, different government officials, trying to make that happen, trying to get the gas workers involved. We think it's important for a few reasons that gas workers are part of a pilot, part of the beginning. Probably two of the most important ones. First is ensure that geothermal district jobs are good jobs. Our gas workers have what we call mature collective bargaining agreements with utility companies. These agreements have taken years to get to the point where they are now, the point where they provide good wages, good benefits, good working conditions. That doesn't happen easily, especially in today's world. In this country, the labor laws are really deficient. There's proposed legislation right now at the federal level. It's called the PRO Act. We're making it much easier for unions to get a foothold in these newer type industries. It's not easy, and it's hard getting a good collective bargaining agreement for employees at a company that never dealt with a union, or a company that's just starting out. If you're seeing what's going on out there with Amazon right now in Alabama, they're trying to organize, I think, about 5,000 people. It'll be the first time Amazon, with their thousands and thousands of employees, has been unionized, and I hope they can do that. But that's not easy. We'd rather see a utility company with a mature contract that represents people now, today, slide right into a geothermal network. Right off the bat, you have good jobs, good wages, and everything else that comes with it. The second reason why we want to see gas workers involved with this technology right off the bat, gas workers need to see that they're part of the future. Especially, like I said, with all this legislation, gas workers, I still consider myself a gas worker. Feel very threatened. I mean, if you've ever been in that position in your life where your livelihood, your means of providing for you and your family is threatened, and this, is probably way down the road for a lot of them, it still doesn't lessen the fact that that's on their mind, especially the younger workers. They're very concerned about it. When there's a pilot program, something that's just starting off, they want to be part of it. And again, it's important that they are part of it. We'll continue to try and make that happen. That's one of the reasons why I'm here tonight, to talk to people about it. That's how strongly I feel about it. Working with people like Audrey and Zainab and Debbie New, I think it's going to happen. I think we'll get there. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take a lot of work and commitment. But most of the people involved, I know, have that. People ask me, my people ask me, how do you work with people with environmental groups? The position is almost completely opposite. And I basically tell people, look, the people who dedicate their lives to a clean environment, that's probably been the easiest part of trying to do this, because they're people who care about people. That's why they're doing it. So when you think about it, when I think about it, caring about people, that's what unions do. That's what they've always done, whether it's caring for them or helping them care for themselves, helping them deal with big investor-owned utility companies. You can imagine that's not an easy thing to do for a gas worker. That's something we do. So it's been very easy to work with HEET and Gas Leaks Alliance. Again, I think we'll get there. If it's something that Philadelphia is really serious about doing. If anybody has any questions from my perspective, I'd be happy to talk to them. And again, I'll be reaching out to the local union at PGW. So if you have any questions, feel free. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much to our three speakers. I'm blown away. There's so much science and creativity and hard work involved here. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And I know there are many questions here. I just want to lift up how all three of you spoke to all the interconnected issues, and especially in John's talk, that the labor protections, the union protections, are essential to moving every other part of this vision forward. So I want to lift that up. We're going to ask people to write brief questions into the chat box, and I will start with the first one. Then Russell's going to ask the next one. He can choose. Mitch will choose the next one, and we will ask our panelists to just make concise answers so that we can cover a lot of different questions. So if you have a question, please write it into the chat box. And in the meantime, I will ask the question: what kinds of challenges have you seen in the charrettes? We heard some of the labor challenges, but what other kinds of challenges are you seeing, and what kinds of solutions are you finding for bringing people together and moving forward? And you can unmute and speak, whichever of our panelists would like to speak.
I want to echo what John said, that the easy part is working together with people that care. And I think the hard part is overcoming ideas that people have in their mind. So I guess it's education. And so that ranges across a wide range of things. For example, for an engineer, there's kind of it's straight engineering, it's the same equations, but there's a paradigm shift because you're designing for balance instead of peak load. And for an engineer, that can feel very different and new. So working on that. And then for a family, like figuring out every house is different. And if you're going to switch to this, do you have the HVAC in your house to get AC as well? Or how much is the cost, and how are you going to pay for it? The structure, I think the biggest challenge has been figuring out how to ensure in legislation and regulation and structure, in agreements, in DPU statements, that it includes the labor and the equitable access pieces that we care about. And John also alluded to that Eversource, for example, is not currently in agreement on that, and has not clarified whether they would be going forward.
Thank you, Zainab. And John, I don't know if you're looking at the chat box, but there is an outpouring of support for what you spoke to here, an outpouring of support for you and your work in the chat box. I'm turning it over to Russell to ask the next question.
Yeah, so we have a number of questions, and thank you, Yeah, Zambi, you already answered a few of the questions already in the chat. Starting with the one I had asked was, can federal and state infrastructure legislation help fund the financial cost of a just transition to renewables? And the answer was yes. Do you want to elaborate?
And can we even extend that question to ask more about financing models for paying off the debt, for making sure that people can afford the transition, for making sure that we can, that there's money to invest into the new infrastructure that's needed, financing models in general?
So I don't think we have all the answers. Like I said, that's a real challenge. But in Massachusetts, our current legislation is proposing to redirect the funds for gas pipe replacement, which are a lot of funds in Massachusetts because we have a really old system like you do in Philly, and to allow the utility to do something called securitization. It's securing the long-term debt that is used to purchase the infrastructure, to put the infrastructure in. They currently get a utility rate, and it would be a state-backed or securitized lower rate, and redirect in an equation the savings or speculative savings, calculated savings between their normal rate and the securitized rate into a fund that pays for low-income access to the system. So the electric capacity upgrades, weatherization, appliances that may need to be provided in order to ensure that everyone has access, and also pays for worker retraining programs. And that's going to be going through a lot of we're going to learn a lot in the next year or two trying to get that legislation through. I also want to mention that we are proposing that the infrastructure going in owned by the utility includes the ground source heat pump, and that the meter goes on the other side of the heat pump, between the heat pump and the customer, which is good from a technology standpoint. And I can give you a whole list of reasons for that. But also it means that you are having a utility financed large scale infrastructure long-term payback on your heat pumps, which changes the equation.
And becomes cheaper for customers.
Yeah, that was the point.
Thank you. Mitch now is going to ask a question.
Oh my gosh, I want to ask 12 of them, but I can't do that. I want to ask all the labor related questions, but I'm going to save that for the next one. I guess maybe for anyone who wants to answer, can you say any more about how this would work in different types of homes, like radiators versus forced air heating, et cetera? And are you imagining that any significant amount of like energy efficiency, retrofits, upgrading would be needed or desirable, alongside the change out of the utility infrastructure? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I'll take the second part and then Zainab will take the first part. Energy efficiency is always the first renewable. It's the cheapest, fastest, easiest on the planet method possible. So every building should have the energy efficiency before this infrastructure is installed. It'll reduce the size and cost of the needed infrastructure. Go ahead, Zainab, you can.
All right. So if you have forced hot air, it is a really plug and play system. The ground source heat pump can very, very easily interface with forced hot air, providing heating and cooling. If you have forced hot water, you may be able to plug and play, depending on the design of your system, its era, and the temperature it runs at. or you may need some adjustment in your system, but you will be able to use it or with adjustment. However, you will not have a way to cool. So you would need some kind of air distribution system in order to cool. If you have steam radiators and an old boiler, you need a new system to interface with a ground source, network ground source, because the temperature will never get efficiently to the temperature of a steam system. So it is not able to distribute through a steam radiator system.
Thanks.
Oh my goodness, there are so many good questions coming in, and we also had gathered some up in advance of this, so I'm going to ask one of those at this point. How do you see the sequencing and implementation of networked geothermal systems being integrated with energy efficiency retrofits and basic repairs in buildings?
Right. I think it would be done just before the, sort of as we just talked about, as the buildings were connected, they should also have energy efficiency in every possible way, if not before, because energy efficiency is the best.
And I'll just add that I think everyone agrees that energy efficiency is fantastic and we want to do it in every building, and pulling that off logistically is challenging, as I'm sure you all know. And so I hope a little bit that this kind of infrastructure will drive a more systematic and thorough weatherization and energy efficiency effort in front of it as it proceeds street by street.
Russell, over to you to ask a question, Russell.
Okay. Oh man, there's so many questions. Can I do a 2-for-1? And I see a lot of love, brotherly love for John, and thanks and appreciation. And with that, then let me do a 2 for here. Let me go with Duncan, who asks, what's the best way to communicate the benefits, drawbacks of renewable energy investments to unions? And can you talk more about the rank and file education that you mentioned? And then Christine Knapp asks, are there business model analysts for the utilities that have been completed?
So I could probably speak to the union part. So when you talk about educating unions, first you probably want to educate the leadership, because the membership really gets most of their information about this type of stuff through the leadership. Often it's at union meetings. So what I've done is, during the different union meetings that we've had over the couple of years, and we've been doing them on Zoom for the last year, but we'll give everybody an update on what's going on with the climate change legislation and the regulation, and what we've been doing with heat in the geothermal district pilots. But you have to reach out to the leadership first and explain to them, why it's important that people start getting involved in this stuff. Now, you can't just keep your head in the sand and just hope that this goes away. You have to get involved and try and get your people involved right in the beginning.
Thank you for that. Does anyone want to take on the other piece of that question?
Oh, that wasn't.
What was the other part of the
Oh,
question?
the business model piece of the question? Yeah, I'm just getting, so our feasibility study has an initial cost analysis for a utility business model. However, I think there are a lot of plans to do that next with the data coming out of the pilots. I hope there will be more business model analysis for the utilities. I believe both Eversource and National Grid have their own analysis that is not published within their utilities, which you may be able to access before they have applied to pilot.
I think that's to a question that John Braxton has asked a couple times in the chat box as well. Okay, so lifting up a question now from Charmaine Butler, commenting on the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which Pennsylvania is in the process of likely joining. Power is fighting for equity features in that joining. And how would that integrate with this? Could investment funding from RGGI support this transition, for instance?
Yeah, so they're not mutually exclusive. They should both happen. They're both fabulous. RGGI is a cap on carbon emissions and allows for trading and such like that, whereas this is simply a physical method of reducing emissions. We need every way we can to reduce emissions going forward as quickly as possible to be able to combat climate change.
Mitch, thank you for that. Mitch, over to you for a question.
Yeah, I'm trying to fuse a couple questions together. This webinar could easily last all night long and we still wouldn't run out of these. I guess a few people have asked questions about sort of the scale of the construction installation work that would be needed, how long it would take, et cetera. Maybe combined with like how disruptive would it be? And one question was sort of asking, wouldn't it be easier to just like do air source heat pumps? So I'm wondering if you can comment on that stuff. And at the same time, it seems like, I think if I'm understanding correctly, there's like much higher capital cost, but like operational savings over a long period of time, as from what I understand you're explaining. So could you comment any more about that also?
I'm going to let Audrey do that one, but I just want to quickly insert something. The question to John about best way to communicate renewable energy investments to unions. I just want to point out that what we found to be essential to building this relationship and trust is that there's also the best way to listen and learn about the unions and their work and their lives. And I know that going out with the gas trucks for a summer doing some research, absolutely transformed my understanding of what their lives are like and their job, on the job, obviously not there. And I just really recommend that you think of it both ways.
Thank you for that really important point.
And so I'll take some of the rest of and then Zainab, jump in when you want. So currently, gas is a pass-through cost. So the gas companies do not charge any profit on selling you the gas. What they get their profit from is on infrastructure replacement and capital expenditures. So anything that, in terms of a business plan, anything that's an expensive infrastructure but has no fuel cost is both in the interest of the gas companies, because then they're getting more profit, and it's in our interest because we get a lower energy bill in the end, because they won't be spending approximately 60% of their constantly buying new fuel. That 60% instead can stay with us. So it's just a lovely model. And was there more to that question? I'm sorry. Or Zainab, throw in?
Just also about the scale of the construction project. And I wonder if there's any employment projections around that too, like how much of the existing gas workforce could be reemployed in doing, building and maintaining the new infrastructure.
We are actually, hopefully in a month or two, we will have a jobs analysis. It's in process, and there is a pretty clear assumption, at least within the utilities, that all of the current jobs could be transitioned and there would be additional jobs needed. So this would be a job creation mechanism, and hopefully good union jobs. And on the scale and time of construction, I think the best way for me to explain it is to tell you the Eversource timeline. They are going to be formally selecting the site and designing the infrastructure this spring and early summer, installing it over the course of a month in the summer, and are planning to have it operational and collecting data by the fall. The actual drilling, it doesn't take that long in the scheme of things, a week of loud drilling. So it's not in, it's not nothing, but it's not that different than gas pipe replacement. And like John mentioned, you can do the directional drilling, and we have some hopes that that can really change the equation in terms of disruption in the street.
And I'll just add that there's some questions about whether it might be cheaper just to do pure electrification. And, you know, again, you've got the gas companies going bankrupt with gas customers on it and gas workers on it. So there's that. Might not be a financial expense, but I think that that is an emotional and moral expense, as well as a financial expense in terms of the stranded assets. Secondly, the electricity grid will have to be really bolstered, made much, you know, to be able to deal with all of us moving all of our building needs to it, as well as all of our transportation needs to it. So that is a huge expense too. What we're proposing is that we have two different systems where pipes and wires compete to bring us the thermal energy that we need, so that we have two, you know, opposing, systems that, you know, we as gas, you know, as customers can then choose which one we want. Competition is just a wonderful system, I believe.
And I also want to say on the cost thing, because I see there's a lot of questions around that when you're looking at questions of cost, you always have to define where you're drawing your boundaries, right? And your time. And so if you're just talking about individual buildings, air source and ground source heat pumps, which are really the only two non-carbon, thermal, the air source heat pump is like a COP, which is the efficiency of 200 to 400%, which is fantastic, right? But if we go all air source heat pumps in individual buildings, we have to expand our electric grid multiple times, which is a huge infrastructure expense. A ground source heat pump is between 400 and 500% efficient, which is much better than electric. The reason they're not going in and the industry hasn't taken off is they cost a lot up front and you need space to put them in. So if you do ground source heat pumps on individual buildings, you don't need as much electric infrastructure to electrify everything. And you pay back that upfront cost in the first 10 years and you have more efficient. But people don't have the money to do that. And so if we switch and go to this networked ground source heat pump where the utility is paying the upfront cost of the more efficient system, we also get the bonus of all that energy sharing and can get to 600% efficiency. And we need even less electric infrastructure to get all the way to electrification. So it costs less there. So it all depends on where you draw the boundary. If you're including your entire energy transition over the course of 30 years, I know of no cheaper option than this.
And I'll just, because it sounds ridiculous to say 600% efficient, I'll just say that it, for every 1 unit of energy you put in, of electricity, you can move 6 units of naturally occurring thermal energy around, whether heating or cooling, move them into or out of your building. So that's how you get there.
Are there any carbon, oh, was that John? No, okay.
No.
Are there any, oh, Derek Green, okay. Do you want to write your question into the chat box? And I'm going to ask this question in the meantime. Are there any carbon emissions from network geothermal?
So it depends on your electric supply. So you're not directly emitting any carbon from the system. If you are using an electric supply that emits carbon when it is produced, then those are your carbon emissions. If you have a 100% renewable electric supply, you have no direct carbon emissions. And I'm not counting the carbon used to, for example, make the metal for the pipes.
Okay, and one other question, and then we'll go over to Russell. So Russell, you could be choosing your question. We heard about distributing heat through homes, but what about cooking appliances and other kinds of things other than, like drying clothes that are gas powered currently? Cooking and
So
laundry.
there's electric appliances for all of our normal household uses. And, for instance, with, a lot of people think of gas stoves as like cooking with gas, the best, but instead induction cooking is safer, faster, more precise, etc. And really everybody should just try it out. They're really fabulous. Heat pump dryers, etc. We can do everything we need with electricity and then source that electricity from renewables so that it can move to utterly non-emitting. And that's the only way we'll be able to keep this planet in somewhat a recognizable shape for our children and grandchildren.
Oh, and this system can provide hot water.
And we have to figure out the issue of affordability for people to do that transition.
Yes.
Over to Russell.
Yes, and so we have about 8 minutes left. Thank you so much for addressing our questions. So this question may come to John, but I also want to lift up a comment that Antoine Michael has in regards to stating that he realized a complete HVAC geothermal based conversion was done in a historical building that was built in 1888 on 20,000 square feet of space in that historical building. And that system was converted between 2016 and 2021 this year. So he invites anybody for a tour of that building and the geothermal system, and he has his number in the chat. So just wanted to lift that up. But also Alan Drew, he asked John mentioned the time it takes to build mature union agreements with utilities based on a long-term collective bargaining. And he asks, can the maturity of these agreements be maintained in the transitioning of these systems? And if the utility itself is transitioning from a gas company, if the utility itself is transitioning from a gas company to an electric company, can these arrangements easily stay the same so workers can maintain their same level of wages and benefits?
So the first part, I can tell you that my local union at Boston Gas was originally a smaller gas company that was taken over by Boston Gas. They first organized, I think, in the 30s. So that contract really was born 80-something years ago. And it's taken a long time, a lot of bargaining, a lot of struggling. We just had a 7th-month lockout a couple of years ago at National Grid, where we were fighting to maintain the benefits and pay that we currently have. So it's not easy. It's not easy, and it's difficult. If you're talking about a gas company transitioning into geothermal districts, so say, as I think Zaneb said, you have an area that you don't have a lot of customers on the gas line's aging out. You want to get some of the oil heating customers that are in the area onto a geothermal district. That's probably a good area. It would be a lot easier if the company did something like that and utilized the current gas company employees, because with those employees would go their collective bargaining agreement and everything contained within. If you're talking about a gas company transitioning to electrifying the system, so you're completely ending the gas, that obviously that's a real problem for gas workers. Many of the electric companies, they're represented by different local unions, different international unions. Transferring a collective bargaining agreement with that group would be very difficult. It's not impossible. We've been trying to figure out if we can do it with legislation to ensure that the companies have to recognize people's benefit levels and pay levels and seniority levels. We've kind of hit some rabbit holes with that, but you know, we're going to continue to try. It's not easy. The best way to do it, if you're talking about a new technology, actually hydrogen for gas workers, hydrogen blending and renewable natural gas would be the easiest transition. And we do support and talk about that a lot in different forums. But geothermal would be something where it would be much easier to do it if a utility decides to take that step.
I'd just like to say, John, connected to that, that I imagine the outcomes of these collective bargaining transferring agreements would depend a lot on the solidarity of people wrapping around the union to build power together. And when there's that kind of solidarity in the community with labor, anything's possible. So you never,
It can make a big difference. It made a difference during our lockout. We had a lot of public support, even though it was a long lockout. We were dealing with a global company. They make more money than a lot of countries. So, but we did have a lot of public support, and it did make a difference.
Folks, I'm going to start wrapping us up here and thank everybody so incredibly much. It's moving to me to be in a room with so many people who are so committed and so caring to having a fair future on a livable planet. And we're going to work together and we're going to move these things forward. Really appreciate everybody being here. We have an invitation for everyone on March 31st. I just put it in the chat box and I'm going to put it one more time here so everyone can see the link. March 31st, Power is sponsoring with our partners across the state a town hall. We're introducing the Federal Thrive Act and what it means for our state. And we invite everybody in, because these are the kinds of resources that we need to have pour down into our state to make these transitions. So we all need to get educated about it and join together. I'm going to welcome people to just stay for a few minutes after we officially close, just to chat for a few more minutes. And thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to our panelists. You were amazing. Audrey, Zainab, John, thank you so much. And we hope to continue to learn from each of you.
Thank you.
Just to say, everyone who registered, we will send you a follow-up email with some links for the for HEET and other resources, along with the recording of this webinar. And if it's okay, I'm gonna include a link for how people can support the PRO Act, which is the protecting the right to organize bill that John talked about, which is really critical right now. And some of our allies in Philly are doing some great organizing to try to get that passed. So look out for a follow-up email. And thank you so much for our speakers and for everyone who participated. This was really a moving conversation, and I think this will really help us to figure out what we're doing here in Philly. So thank you so much, John and Audrey and Zainab.
Yes, and hopefully we have more conversation. But for now, good evening. And if you want to get involved, anyone on the call, we'll include a sign-in sheet in the follow-up email as well. So thank you for joining us this evening. Thanks, everyone.